Wait, what is this? Two debates in a row? What is this? No, it cannot be. Yeah, actually, we are going to have another debate tonight. And before we get started, though, I want to make it very clear to people about this particular debate. Now, I said I want to get back into Young Earth Creationism a bit, debunking Young Earth Creationism. I'm not getting back into it because I was, one, I'm never a Young Earth Creationist, and two, I don't believe Young Earth Creationism is true. Matter of fact, I believe it's absolutely not true. So I want to make it very clear before we get started that this is not a neutral, I guess, platform like modern day debate, right? I respect his format, right? I like the way he does his stuff. He doesn't really get involved in discussions too much, but he has a fair and kind of a non-moderated type of discussions, right? I mean, he doesn't really have to jump in too much. This format's a little bit different because I already am out there on the record of saying that the fossil record doesn't support Young Earth Creationism, right? And I'm on the record as being somebody who wants to argue against Young Earth Creationism and try to eliminate it from the school system. So this is not an unbiased platform, and I want to thank Christopher right off the bat for actually coming in on a platform he knows is not going to be biased toward him. Or now that doesn't mean we're not fair, right? And this is what I want to get to my audience is that just because you're not neutral as a moderator or not neutral as a platform doesn't mean you're not fair, right? And I have a lot of respect for Christopher. I've known him for a long time. We started off iffy, but, years later, But anyways, welcome back, Chris. And let's get you guys started here. So tonight you're going to be having a discussion with Jackson Wheat, a well-known YouTuber, phylogenists, evolutionary dude. I don't know. What are you, Jackson? I don't even know what you call yourself these days.
I'm just a student as of current. I haven't even got my bachelor's yet, but I'm close. I'm real close. I can practically taste it.
But you're one of those lay people that I think a lot of the actual science people in the community that really have a background in science have a lot of respect for.
Yeah, I would hope so anyways. I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, I've had Donald Prothero, Matthew Herron, P.C. Myers, R.N. Raw. I've had loads of science people on my channels, and I've talked to them.
Yeah, matter of fact, I got a chance to talk to Dr. Prothero on your channel, and I was thrilled because he was a real nice guy, and he wants to debate a flat earther, and we're going to make that happen one of these days.
Yeah, he wrote about it in his most recent book. I don't remember the name, but yeah, he wrote all about conspiracy theories and stuff.
Yeah. So we told him we would find somebody for him eventually. But anyways, Christopher, welcome back. You're the Young Earth Creationist here. Boy, did you come to the wrong channel. But what up, man?
Yeah, I'm Chris Silvius. For anybody who doesn't know me, I just been studying the Bible for maybe 12 years, and this creation evolution topic for the last 6 years. I started a church because that's basically the only thing that I could figure out how to do. There's nothing in my local area that supports my vision, none of the local churches. So I started my own thing. You'll have to type in my full name, Christopher Silvius, to find me on YouTube. Otherwise, Chris Silvius, short, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And congratulations, Jackson, on that bachelor's degree. I think your Facebook still says that you're a high school student, though.
Oh, I'm on Facebook so little anymore. I used to use it more, but yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I've got to change. I have you under Steve. You're now Chris now on the outside thing. They're looking at your.
We could all be Steve.
Everybody's Steve, right? I mean, isn't everybody a little Steve? Somewhat. But anyways, I want to thank the people watching this. I know a lot has been going on with the communities. A lot of people are not getting notifications. A lot of people are not, watching a lot of the YouTube channels because they're just not even knowing about certain things. So I've had that problems. I've had people tell me, like, did you watch that? I'm like, I didn't even get a message on it. I didn't get a notification on it. What I think people are resolving that with is to subscribe and unsubscribe and subscribe back might fix that problem if you're having that issue. But anyways, okay, so you guys want to talk about the fossil records. So Christopher, I'm gonna let you go like guide us on this. What you actually think is why the fossil record indicates a young Earth, and then Jackson will kind of take it from there. And probably I'm gonna guess explain to you why it's not.
Jackson said he agreed to give me 10 minutes. Okay. No holds barred, where I can just basically lay out what I want, and then y'all can light me up like a dumpster fire and roll me down a hill afterwards.
All right. I'll tell you what Jackson says goes. So I'm going to set up a timer right now. It's going to be a 10-minute countdown timer. And I'm going to mute, and he's going to mute, and the audience is going to mute. And you just say go.
All right. I really appreciate you giving me the time. Nature.com. I'm going to begin.
Go.
Nature.com article that came out. DNA has 521-year-old half-life. October 2012 says effectively every bond would be destroyed after a maximum of 6.8 million years. The DNA would cease to be readable much earlier, perhaps around roughly 1.5 million years. And according to Science Magazine, an article that came out in 2017, just how those collagen sequences survive tens of millions of years is not clear, is what they say in that article. And then another one, the last one that I'm going to read is livescience.com. They say in their article that the DNA can last no more than 5 or 6 million years. So, of course, this is still millions of years, all right, or thousands of years. I think one said that the only real legitimate date for the DNA fossils, or the not DNA fossils, but DNA contained in these fossils would be 700,000 years. That would be the most accurate reading that they have. But in either case, that's older than 6,000 years. So that doesn't necessarily prove a global flood that occurred around 4,400 years ago, but it does show that there seems to be a big contradiction between the dates that you're getting from the DNA based on how long that it can last on today's current measurements and the radiometric dates. And there's another contradiction, like the C14 that you find in dinosaurs, coal beds, and diamonds that cannot last any. On current measurements, it's estimated that it's unreadable after about 100,000 years. But they find it in these dinosaur bones, coal beds, and diamonds that are supposed to be millions of years old. Polonium halos indicate super heavy elements that used to exist, which would be relatively stable and last for maybe a day, weeks, months, or years before decaying into the lighter but still heavy elements like potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, samarium, neodymium, or uranium lead. Now, Walt Brown and Robert Gentry have conflicting ideas about these polonium halos and what they indicate. Dr. Gentry, he believes that these halos are evidence of an instantaneous creation because they have no daughter or they have no parent elements. You can tell what the isotope that decayed, the original parent isotope, you can tell what that was based on the circumference. If you measure the center of this polonium halo out to the actual halo, you go from the center out towards the rim, you can measure that, and based on that measurement and based on the circumference of the halo, you can determine what the parent element was. But the problem is you don't have any of the precursor or parent elements to these polonium halos. They're missing their parent halos, meaning that they derive from some other kind of element. And that's where Walt Brown would conflict with Gentry and say that these polonium halos are actually evidence of super heavy elements that used to exist or were created actually or produced, generated by these geophysics that were occurring during a global flood. These super heavy elements that were formed at that time, and then they decayed into the lighter but still heavy elements that are used in radiometric dating techniques today. There are many calculations based on current measurements using the principles of uniformitarianism that indicate a relatively young Earth, like the magnetic field is declining. We know that it was probably gone 10,000 years ago based on current measurements. The the comets, they can only last around 10,000 years. And then I've already mentioned the carbon-14, which can only last about 100,000 years. And there's several other ways to indicate that the Earth is probably young, just using uniformitarian. The way that things have been today is the way that they've always been, slow, long, gradual processes. But you can't, and that's what they use when they do radiometric dates. They assume that the decay rate and all these things have been the same, that this radioactive decay has been occurring at current rates for millions or billions of years. But if you try to do that with determining an age of the Earth using uniformitarian principles, the atheist or the old Earth creation scientists will tell you that things were different in the past, that there were unknown physics or laws of chemistry and stuff that were different in the past. And so we can't just use, today's measurements and determine what happened in the past. But that is what they do with the radiometric dates. And I would say that they're making a mistake there. So there's bubbles trapped in amber containing up to twice the amount of oxygen contained in today's atmosphere. In the Carboniferous area, where you find the poles, and I know that I'm using a term that is used by old Earth people. I know I'm using their terminology, and I respect their terminology. I respect how they came up with this classification system, and I'm honored and privileged to use it. But I do disagree with what they say that these mean. So I'm sorry to steal their terminology, but I have to use it, and I will admit that. So there's bubbles trapped in amber that contain up to twice the amount of oxygen that is in today's amber. In the Carboniferous area, you have the giant insects, and that's because they breathe through their skin. So this increased oxygen is going to allow them to grow bigger, and you're going to have far more plants and much more trees than today, which is why if you took out all of the trees today and formed them into coal, you could not possibly produce the amount of coal that is in the earth today with the trees that we have available on the surface of the planet. Okay, it wouldn't be possible. There's so much coal, and that's because there was a different environment, a completely different world with bigger trees, more oxygen, bigger and better plants. In the Cenozoic era, where you find the prehistoric mammals, those are all giant. In the North American burial grounds, you find giant humans. There's a book called Giants on Record by Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira, where they have several articles from all over North America, news articles that came out. They went and investigated libraries in all the states and found records of giant skeletons being found in ancient burial mounds. They were looted in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And you have polystrata fossils, which connect multiple layers, indicating that those did not take millions of years to form. They were laid down at the same time. Index fossils, which show a least complex creatures to more complex creatures at the top. So the deeper that you go down into the strata until you get to the Cambrian, the least complex these organisms are going to be biologically. And then they will increase in complexity as you come up to the surface, if you will. Precambrian fossils, or not fossils, but there is microorganisms in the Precambrian layers, but that is to be expected because that's where they live today. There's little tiny organisms that are way deep in the crust of the earth, even still today. But most of the heat that is produced in the crust of the earth, most of the heat that's generated from the earth is coming from if I'm wording that correctly, it's coming from uranium and lead that is deep within the crust of the earth. So the radioactivity of uranium and lead is primarily in the granitic crust, specifically Precambrian. Anything that doesn't have fossils is where you're going to find most of the uranium, lead, and most of the heat that is produced by radioactivity. Whereas if you go into the Cambrian and layers that are above that, you're going to find significantly less uranium and lead. Lead is everywhere. Uranium and lead, or uranium specifically, you can find that just about everywhere. Get yourself a Geiger counter and go walking around, and you'll probably get some clicks somewhere. If you look hard enough, it's pretty much everywhere. It's even more abundant than gold or silver, I believe. It's pretty abundant uranium, but most of it's concentrated deep within the crust of the earth. And so if I can close with this, I don't know if I'm approaching my time or not, but just let me get this out. The flutter phase, where 40 days and 40 nights of rain, where the crust of the earth is basically flagging, it's flapping like a flag in the wind. That's going to drive these granitic pillars, which are connecting the crust to the mantle, deeper within the mantle, producing piezoelectric effects from the quartz that is contained within the granitic crust in the pillars, and that's going to surge up through the crust of the earth much like a lightning bolt. And then the hyperconvection or catastrophic plate tectonics produced billions of years of radioactivity during what is known as the compression event, when the mantle is rising up from the crust of the earth and basically it folds. I can show you this right here. see. Just so you know what I'm talking about, I have to use images sometimes to get my point across.
And time.
Right
Okay. Okay. So Jackson. First, let me say I'm so sorry about this. I don't. Jackson, go ahead. You got 10 minutes. Here's the problem that before you even go though, and I'm just going to throw this out there. This is why I don't know why you gave him 10 minutes. Whenever you're dealing with a young creationist or flat earther, you never give them 10 full minutes because they'll go over 50,000 concepts. And I like to discuss one. And I don't think he ever touched the fossil record, which was supposed to have been the topic of the discussion. But you pick what you want, what you can remember out of that if you took notes. You got 10 minutes now, Jackson, too?
I took notes on
All
it,
right,
so
good.
I wrote down a number of the concepts
right.
that we can go over.
All
But
right,
I
so-
do have my intro here.
All right, so you got 10 full minutes as well. I'm going to mute. He's going to mute. And you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Go for it.
Alrighty. The topic is the fossil record. Is it indicative of evolution or young Earth creationism? For starters, we have to remember two things. Creationists believe the Earth was created some 6,000 to 10,000 years ago and that a global flood occurred roughly 4,000 years ago, which wiped out nearly all life on Earth. But does the fossil record show this? If this is true, we should expect all complex life to enter the fossil record at roughly the same time because the ancestral archetypes of each Behrman were created at the same time. We should also expect fossils after that point to be jumbled up. There should be no clear trends among species. So let's look at some specifics. Much of what we know about fossil organisms comes from exceptionally preserved assemblages known as Lagerstätten. Since the global flood buried most, if not all, fossils, we should expect Lagerstätten to show this. Well, do they? No, certainly not. While there are Lagerstätten that are associated with periodic flooding events such as Mason Creek, most are not. Lagerstätten that preserve terrestrial environments often resulted from volcanic events such as the Ixian Formation and the White River Group, and one, the Tanis site, even records the immediate aftermath of a meteoric impact. No indication of a global flood here. When we look to Lagerstätten that preserve aquatic environments, the story is the same. Many marine Lagerstätten aren't the result of some watery catastrophe, but instead record animals being buried in very calm anoxic environments. There's even a term for this, platenkalk. Such features cannot form at all under the turbulent conditions claimed by creationists. These Lagerstätten show little to no bioturbation, and due to this, the sediments are concreted into thin, finely laminated, undisturbed limestones. The Solnhofen limestone, where Archaeopteryx was discovered, is one such example. Now, nothing I've said so far concerns time. Looking at these deposits alone casts doubt on the existence of a recent creation and global flood. After all, if these organisms were living all at the same time, we should reasonably expect them to be buried together. However, they aren't. They are buried in particular strata. Their placement isn't based on size or density, so hydrologic sorting is out of the question, nor are their environments arranged in any particular order, since multiple environments can exist in the same strata. For example, late Cretaceous strata contains marine, forest, and desert deposits, no sign of a global flood. We can, however, use features of strata to arrange them in a particular order, this one associated with time. This is an entire field called chronostratigraphy. After all, naturalists were doing this with strata in Europe long before radiometric dating had been discovered. Naturalists realized there had been an age of fish, followed by an age of reptiles, and then an age of mammals even before Darwin first conjectured on evolution. Correlating strata across the planet using various means, including paleomagnetism, index fossils, and other useful markers like the KPG iridium layer, has largely shown that early image of natural history to be correct. The lowest layers contain small aquatic soft-bodied organisms, followed later by the appearance of larger aquatic organisms. Fish and other vertebrates appear in the record later, which is followed by the terrestrialization of tetrapods, well, as well as arthropods, and the appearance of amniotes. Mammals appear thereafter, following the nested hierarchy pattern expected by evolution. Creationists have tried to explain this apparent pattern using a number of methods: hydrologic sorting, ecological zonation, behavioral responses, etc., but all of them fail in one way or another. Even some creationists, like Answers in Genesis' Kurt Wise, point out that these explanations fail, though his personal explanation fails as well. Evolution over vast ages is the best explanation for the placement of organisms in the fossil record. This explains why certain species occur in some strata but not others, why organisms are not jumbled up, and why there is a clear progression. We find no trilobites alongside flounders, no whales with mosasaurs, no Archaeopteryx with parakeets, no Precambrian bunnies, and no humans hunting hadrosaurs. There is no single entry of all the Barrowman archetypes into the fossil record, and no evidence that most or all of the fossils were laid down in a global flood, which is something I'd like to know. Where exactly do you claim the flood strata start and end? To end my opening with this statement from Kurt Wise of Answers in Genesis. Quote, of Darwinism's four stratomorphic intermediate expectations, that of the commonness of interspecific stratomorphic intermediates has been the most disappointing for classical Darwinists. The current lack of any certain interspecific stratomorphic intermediates has, of course, led to the development and increased acceptance of punctuated equilibrium theory. Evidence for Darwin's second expectation of stratomorphic intermediate species includes such species as Baragwanathia between rhiniophytes and lycopods, Pacaya between echinoderms and chordates, Purgatorius between the tree shrews and primates, and Proconsul between the non-hominoid primates and the hominoids. Darwin's third expectation of higher taxon stratomorphic intermediates has been confirmed by such examples as the mammal-like reptile groups between the reptiles and mammals, and the phenacodontids between the horses and their presumed ancestors. Darwin's fourth expectation of stratomorphic series has been confirmed by such examples as the bird series, the tetrapod series, the whale series, the various mammal series of the Cenozoic, including the horse, camel, elephant, pig, and Titanotheres series, the Cantius and Plesiodapis primate series, and the hominid series. Evidence for not just one, but for all three of the species level and above types of stratomorphic intermediates expected by macroevolutionary theory is surely strong evidence for macroevolutionary theory. Creationists therefore need to accept this fact. It certainly cannot be said that traditional creation theory expected or predicted any of these fossil finds. Close quote. Okay, whew. There's my intro. So let's get into.
That was wonderful, by the way. I like it, man. That was awesome. What you
So now let's.
He's still got 5 minutes. Well, 3 minutes.
We can get into the. We can get into the back and forth now.
Okay.
Did you take? Is there anything that I said that you want to look at? Because I took notes on yours.
Yeah, I took some notes. That was incredible. The first thing you said was the jumbled crust thing. Can we stay on that for a minute? The jumbled, like
sure.
You're saying that the global flood would have jumbled up the crust instead of perfectly.
Well, I said it would have jumbled up the fossil. Well, it would have jumbled up the crust, but also the fossil or the sediment, because the claim is that the sediment, the fossiliferous sediments, at least if you read AIG, ICR, CMI, is that they would have all been laid down together except for the Precambrian basement. But the rest of them, all the fossiliferous sediments, were laid down during the flood, or some before, some after, which is why I asked you, where do you think the flood strata begins and ends?
The flood strata is going to begin, it's just the crust of the earth. You got the crust and the mantle. So everything that is a part of the crust of the earth right now is existing before the flood. You just have a shift in the crust, like the hydroplating. So there wasn't anything before the flood that isn't here today, like that.
Well, I mean,
the flood strata began. There was, let me put it into as basically as I can. Before the flood, you have a crust of the earth, and then most of the water that we see today in the oceans and the lakes, etc., is under the crust of the earth. So basically one land mass, no deserts, no ice caps, nothing like that. Small bodies of water, one giant land mass with all these trees and stuff, and all these animals that were created in 6 little 24-hour periods of time. You have that crust right there. And then it's basically going to be recycled from the bottom up. So all the crust that is on the bottom, the dirt that's on the bottom, if you will, is going to be swept up by the fountains of the deep and deposited back onto the top. So it's like so the crust would begin, the strata that was laid down at the time of the flood, that would begin somewhere probably around the Moho-Revisic discontinuity, I would suppose.
So what you're in essence saying is that, is the implication here that all of the crust was churned up by the global flood?
Yeah. Just like it is in plate tectonics, but we're talking about a much more...
Not exactly. It's not exactly
faster.
The same.
It's not occurring over billions of years. It happened rapidly.
Well, you're not talking about subduction zones and cratons being absorbed back into the mantle, which is being redistributed at rift valleys. You're talking about the entire thing just being churned up, essentially, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
it's just a recycle. It's the same thing as plate tectonic.
So what you're in essence saying is that all strata are the result of the flood.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of it. I mean, if you went deep enough, you would find pre-flood crust where there's probably any fossils at all, but you would find evidence of these radioactive elements. There would be an abundance of uranium and lead.
Okay, so there is in fact pre-flood crust that exists.
It's mostly on the surface. You go deep enough, you can find stuff
It's
that.
on the surface?
Yeah, the upper strata. You like if you're going Precambrian, you got to go even lower than that to find any pre-flood crust. It's really deep.
So it's not on the surface. It's way at the bottom, closer to the mantle.
Right.
Or I suppose. Okay. Well. Okay. So. Okay. Hey, everybody in the live chat. Okay. I'm just trying to get all this straight because so when you see strata, and if you're looking at a geological paper or a paleontological paper and you're seeing how they're arranged, and you see certain types of organisms in the lower strata, certain types of organisms towards the middle, and certain types of organisms towards the top, such as index fossils, what would your reasoning be for why this apparent trend exists?
You said that you disagreed that ecological zoning or hydrologic sorting would be a reasonable model to.
Yeah, I can demonstrate why both of those are insufficient to explain the distribution of organisms in the fossil record.
Can you hit me on that?
Well, hydrologic sorting would expect that organisms based on size and surface area would end up being ordered in a particular way, and there is no such ordering in the fossil record. The largest organisms are kind of in the middle, going towards the top, and so there are carbonaceous impressions based on chronostratigraphy of bacteria towards the oldest sediments. Things like Apex Point, which is one of the oldest sediments, has carbonaceous imprints of bacteria, right? So that would be below these strata that contain actual larger organisms, even eukaryotes. The largest terrestrial animals, the dinosaurs, were alive in the Mesozoic, which is above, smaller things like tetrapods and amniotes, but it's also below smaller mammals. So what would be the reason? So that would immediately knock out hydrologic sorting, but also ecological zonation doesn't work because there is no ecological trend in the fossil record either. There are different environments that organisms live in, and as I said with the Cretaceous, there are different strata, there are different zones even at the same time in the same layer. That's why with the late Cretaceous, you have desert like the Gobi Desert, where you have like Psittacosaurus and the feathered theropods. You have forest environments like in Montana. What did I say? Oh, and marine environments like Niobrara chalk, and so that would eliminate an ecological zonation. Did I understand? Do I need to? Is there? If like I need to go back and repeat anything, just like don't hesitate. Just say hold on, slow down, or whatever. That's fine.
Well, I think I'm ready to respond to that. The
Oh, go ahead.
hydrological sorting. This is going to happen because the flood is covering the earth. The water is totally covering the earth, so there's no continents basically to stop the waves, and that's how you're going to get the strata. Now, as far as the fossils are concerned, and also the process of liquefaction is going to help that out a lot too. But the fossils, the reason that you see, for instance, bigger fishes at the oldest strata, and then you proceed to younger strata and you find smaller fishes, and then eventually you run into these large amphibians, and then you progress even farther up in the geologic strata and you start finding smaller amphibians, and this process will continue until you get to the very top. where you're finding the monkeys and the humans. And the reason for this is because of where they're living before the flood. They have you got the big fishes at the bottom, and you're gonna find the little fishes at the top because these are they're living in the same area. But yeah, that's kind of a tough one there. Yeah, you got something to say?
But you don't. You don't. The first fish in the fossil record, if we're looking just at this bio or chronostratigraphically, the first fish, the first vertebrates in the fossil record are these little inch-long fish from places like China, from places like the Burgess Shale in Canada, the Chengjiang biota in China. These are whole environments that are being preserved, whole ecosystems, and most of the animals are very small, and so these are occurring way below the bigger fish. The bigger fish, and this kind of actually goes back to what you were saying about oxygen levels. Oxygen has a very long history in the Earth. Oxygen constrains because, as I'm sure you understand. Well, for anyone who doesn't know, we breathe oxygen in because that's going into our cellular respiration cycle. We're using it to make ATP, right? Well, if there's not a whole lot of oxygen in the atmosphere, things can't get large. Well, you also can't get large without having the ability to have a larger genome, but that's kind of another factor. But when we're talking about eukaryotes, when we're talking about vertebrates, the first vertebrates in the record, things like Hycoichthys and Pikaia, they're very small because oxygen is prohibitively low. Oxygen is still higher than it was in the past, but it's still low compared to modern standards. So as the oxygen levels are still rising, you don't see larger fish until the Silurian. You don't see larger animals until the Ordovician and Silurian, and then things start getting bigger, and then you have a transition onto land for arthropods and tetrapods later. And so because the oxygen is changing, it's not just oxygen was way more in the past. It's that the levels of atmospheric oxygen both in the ocean and in the levels of oxygen both in the ocean and in the atmosphere have fluctuated drastically in the past.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I
Okay.
would say that that's based on the escaping oxygen at the time of the flood because a lot of hot air is escaping at a very rapid scale during the flood because of the opening of the canopy at the north and south poles. So that's why you have a progression of decreasing levels of oxygen as you progress to the younger layers of strata.
Well,
That would be my answer to that.
well, here's the thing though. At the very in the beginning of the Earth, there was not a whole lot of free oxygen. The oxygen was mainly tied up in carbon dioxide, things sulfur dioxide, things like that. To the activity, from what we can see in the fossil record, from what we can reason from phylogenetics, from phylogenetic analyses of bacteria, like such as cyanobacteria, the blue green algae, is and the rocks, such as the banded iron formations, is there was very low free oxygen, and then because of cyanobacteria, and we can see we have cyanobacterial mats in the fossil record, uh, we can see an increase in levels of oxygen, which resulted about 2.4 billion years ago in what's known as the Great Oxidation Event or Great Oxygenation Event. So basically, have an outgassing of oxygen from the ocean into the atmosphere, and as they continue, as cyanobacteria, because they're giving off oxygen as a waste product, right? They're taking in these other elements, these other chemicals, and producing oxygen, and so they're just running this chain for almost what, like over a billion years, billion and a half years, and this eventually results in the oxygenation of the planet, right? So we see this in the fossil record. We see gradual increase in oxygen and increase and increase and increase, and you can use different methods for determining how much the oxygen has increased. Elements like I think manganese and chromium are very touchy with regard to oxygen, if I remember correctly. But you can test this, and we can also see this via the ability of organisms to increase in size throughout the fossil record. As you mentioned, the arthropods in the Carboniferous. Well, as you said, the Carboniferous was a time where you basically have the development of Well, during the Devonian, you have the development of lignin, which are lignified trees, lignified vascular tissue, which allows them to make wood, and so they can grow larger, and now they can produce
Okay.
more oxygen. What? Yeah.
Yeah, it was,
Right. And so, as you said, the insects were larger back then. You have like Arthropleura and Meganeura, which are these gigantic arthropods because they take in oxygen through their skin. Well, this again, this as far as we can tell from the fossil record, this all appears to be natural. It's you have no gymnosperms, certainly no angiosperms by this point. You have little plants like bryophytes; these are the earliest land plants, and then you have you have like ferns, and then later you have the progymnosperms, and then you have the true gymnosperms. So this all looks again very evolutionary. This is exactly what we would predict based on a nested hierarchy of plant traits, and this caused the increase in atmospheric oxygen, which allowed these organisms to get larger. And then later, uh, you had like you had events where the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, where lots of these rainforests died off for different reasons, and so oxygen, atmos- atmospheric oxygen content kind of went down, and so you don't see these giant arthropods anymore. But that all
mhm.
seems very natural and not at all associated with global flooding or anything like that.
Yeah, I would say that it's just a coincidence. It may look like that, but if you really look at it, it's not the case. Like if the flat earthers, they look at a plane and they see that it's landing on a surface that's spinning and they think that it ought to crash because the surface underneath is moving. So the plane, how's it landing perfectly flat? And it's like they don't understand at all the concept of momentum. They're completely overlooking the fact that the Earth and us, we're moving like at
That's
sixty
not
thousand
that's
miles per
that's
hour or
not
something,
momentum, by the way.
or whatever it is. They're completely overlooking certain laws of physics and stuff that can easily explain this.
Well,
And that's because they're ignorant of certain information. So I would say that there's a certain level of ignorance that you have in the fossil record that is making you
probably
biased.
true.
Yeah,
Probably true. But here's the thing, though. You have this concerted. You mentioned. Okay, well, let me make this point. You mentioned during your opening statement. Okay, I'm using the terms that were bestowed upon us by old naturalists, right? These terms like Triassic, Devonian. These were made by naturalists, pre-evolutionary naturalists, right, back in the 1800s. Um, these terms do not hinge upon evolution being true. These guys were Christian, by the way. They were old earthers because they were looking at these formations and how fast they can accrue sediment. And they're going, I don't think the earth is 10,000 years old with this thing accruing an inch of sediment per year. And they were obviously looking at it and going also at the same time because you have guys like, I can't remember his name. Uh, uh, Stated clearly did a whole video about him, but it's this guy who ran the Royal Society, and he was like, "Yeah, the flood is true," but over time he looks at these geologic formations, and he's still a Christian, and he eventually kind of goes, "Yeah, the global flood didn't happen, but the Earth is still old." And so, when you look, they invented these terms because these terms apply to unique strata within the Earth. You have this layer of limestone, and we're going to say that's Triassic basement. So you got this limestone here. Well, here we have this, and this limestone is not only in England, but we're also looking at it in France, whatever. And then above that we have this other layer, which is sandstone, and this sandstone layer is also in Spain. And this is kind of how chronostratigraphy got started. They're looking at these very particular layers. Sicker Point is one of the best examples, where you have rock, then you have eroded rock, and then you have another layer. How would you erode the middle layer? Right? How do you erode this middle layer, but also they're all being laid down at the same time? Right? How does that happen?
Just run that by me one more time so
So
that I can respond.
okay, so this there's this formation called Sicker Point. I believe it's in England or it's in the United Kingdom, but it's basically you have a Silurian layer, then you have an eroded layer on top of that, and then you have a Devonian layer on top of that.
Eroded layer. What do you mean by that?
So the top of the layer has been eroded. It has been eroded away. So it's like a conglomerate, if I remember correctly. whereas these other
How
layers,
so? Is this by like weathering, erosion? What kind of?
yes, yeah, by weathering from the environment. And so the question is, how would the environment lay down a layer, then an eroded layer, and then another layer? I don't understand how you get this middle eroding happening.
Hmm. Well, I really would have to look into how, like, what the microscopic and like, uh, I don't know how to word this. Whatever the strata looks like, whatever the appearance that it is giving, that is making them conclude that this is the result of weathering. What I would say it was is the Earth is not completely, all of the continents or the crust of the Earth is not going to be covered during the whole flood period. So there's going to be phases where the tides are going up and down, and that's going to expose a lot of land. And at that point, you have opportunity for this erosion to occur before the next wave comes in and brings a whole another mudslide to cover it up. And then hydrologic sorting and liquefaction would then sort those layers above that into strata.
Well, here's the thing: the strata aren't sorted by. If they were sorted hydrologically, they'd be sorted by particle size. But the strata, the layers, vary quite a bit by particle size. So there's no evidence there of it, the very fact that we have layers, period, it means that they weren't laid down all at the same time. I mean, how do you deposit limestone, for instance, in a flood? You can't. It's a layer specifically that accrues due to the dying of organisms. You have fossil critters like or little shelly critters like foraminifera and diatoms and coccoliths and radiolarians, and these live their little lives doing photosynthesis, and they die, and their shells fall to the seafloor, and over time, as more sediment comes down, it compacts them, and that forms limestone and chalk and these other sediments. There's no way these sorts of things could form under a flood. That's just not how they form. They form in rather calm environments. Like I mentioned, the Solnofan limestone, where Archaeopteryx is buried. These things, these environments, these plattenkalk, as they're called in the technical jargon, can only form under extremely calm conditions where you have slow sedimentation, little to no bioturbation, organism dies, falls in, gets covered. They're anoxic. They're typically like anoxic lagoons, things like that. And so there are no organisms living there who could degrade them, except for maybe like bacteria.
Yeah,
And
let me
so,
respond to that right there.
okay, yeah,
You
yeah, go
got
ahead.
like in the fossil record, like what you're saying, you have evidence of animals that did not die in a catastrophic flood. They obviously died in a normal condition, like
That's what I
animals
would say. Yeah.
die today. There is evidence of that. I would not disagree with that at all. I agree with that 100%. And the way that I would explain that is animals are already dead before the flood occurs. They died naturally, and then the flood buried them afterwards. Simple answer.
Okay.
Simplest one that I can conjure in my little brain at
Mm.
this moment.
Well, okay. I mean, see, I would understand. I can understand that response to a degree, but I mentioned that there are examples of catastrophic burials in the fossil record, like the Yixian Formation, like the Tanis site, the White River Group. Um, yes, Mason Creek. That's another one. There are examples of catastrophic burials, even by flooding. Mason Creek is an estuary environment that had repeated bursts of fresh water. That's where actually the Tully Monstrum comes from. Is that site? I don't know if you're familiar with. It's this really weird critter. It's very bizarre. Um, but but even still, they can tell that it's not a global flood because we have other sediments from the Carboniferous from around the world dating to that time, and it doesn't show a single flood. It's just here are these periodic flooding events, and we don't see if any fossiliferous strata is the result of a global flood, that should be apparent. Even if it's not all of the even if it's not all of the whole world, right? It's not all of the crust. If one stratum is the result of a global flood, we should be able to tell that. Whether in the rocks, through the mega ripples, things like that. Um, or in the fossils. But we don't have that sort of evidence. Or if we do, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I would think that the limestone would be an example of how we can know that certain layers were formed from a global flood, and also the polystrata
No,
trees.
that no, that was my point. Is limestone can't be formed under a global flood because it's tiny shelly organisms, these protists, which sink down and die and become compacted over time. That's precisely how we know it can't be formed by a global flood.
So
I
we
think
we
that
have a
you're
question on that real
underestimating
quick.
the.
So let me get a question in real quick. Man, this is going by fast. This is like 50 minutes in already. Holy crap.
Oh,
40
geez, I
minutes.
didn't even.
45 minutes. Yes, man. So on the somebody had asked, Radio had asked, and it's a good question. That's why I want to get on that. Before you go to jump to 5,000 other things on the like the chalk formations, right? When it comes to limestone, he wants to know if you know of a catastrophic wave that forming. We do know that coccolithophores and coccoliths require very slow moving water to form this very dense. Form a chalk, which can be several meters. I mean, there's no possible way that any known process by some kind of flood would cause this to occur. Do you know, Chris, of a catastrophic way that you could lay down these coccoliths and coccolithophores to make some kind of to chalk or limestone, even inches, more or less, several tens of hundreds of meters? Do you know of a process like that?
Yeah, and there's also another example of what is called diatoms. They found an entire whale buried in them. So you got these little tiny organisms that have to live their little lives, like you said, and then they die, and then they slowly float down or whatever to the bottom, and then they get deposited, and then more of them die, and then you get this whole layer that eventually becomes solidified. Well, I think that the best explanation for that would be whirlpools during the time of the flood. If you're underestimating the sheer multitude of these little microorganisms, yeah, you might say that the cliffs of Dover couldn't be formed rapidly. But if you understand exactly how much of them there are and what the process of a whirlpool, it can accumulate all of these little microorganisms into one spot and then deposit them.
Okay,
Naturally.
there is absolutely no way for a whirlpool to deposit coccoliths, forams, and diatoms in the shape of the White Cliffs of Dover. There is just factually no way for that process to occur. A whirlpool is spinning water, right? It's going around like we have water sink and it spins around. These don't show any sign of that whatsoever. There is no evidence that there was a whirlpool going on generating this. And in fact, we have in different chalk and different limestones, and this is another point, we have trends within fossils. Read Donald Prothero's book, Evolution, What the Fossils Say and Why It Matters, has a lot of examples of trends in these sorts of rocks because when these organisms die, when forams and diatoms and all those guys die, they have their little shells get preserved, right? They get compacted. Well, they're very tough, right? They're very good at getting preserved. And so you can look at these things. You take little slices of the rock and you can look at the forams in it. And the forams in these cores that are drilled show evolutionary sequences. It'll have like you'll have like a guy with one little lobe at the bottom at this first strata. Then the next one up, he's got two little lobes now, and the next one up, he's got three little lobes now. And you can find trends like that. If this is a whirlpool causing this or a global flood, there's no reason we should see these sorts of trends. We could have the third one on the bottom, the one in the middle, and the second one on top. I mean, there's no reason that these sorts of trends should exist because they're not based on size. These guys are all about the same size, and yet we see them.
Could you say that we could do experiments to actually demonstrate slow moving water would lay it down like this as opposed to something like a whirlpool? Which I couldn't
absolutely.
imagine ever doing something like this. It seems very ad hoc to me to even throw that out there.
Yeah, I don't know any fossil strata that has ever been proposed to have been the result of a whirlpool. They're not. They're such ephemeral occurrences, and I can't.
And rare. Yeah, I mean, they're very, very, very rare.
Yeah, I mean the size that would necessitate forming this strata is absurd. There's just no way for this sort of thing to happen under a global flood or a gigantic whirlpool. There's just no way.
Chris, I mean, did you read that somewhere, or is that something that you just came up with?
Yeah, I'm very curious. Where did you come up with that? Or
I've never. That's a new one even on me.
Kent Hovind's
Oh!
the first guy that I heard say that.
A Kent Hovind tourist guide.
But anyways,
Wait.
if you disagree with that, I was,
Is that what you said? A Kent Hovind. Did you legit just say Kent Hovind tourist guide?
I got $10 right here. If you can show me, give me an article that debunks or addresses this specific issue that we're talking about right now, an article which says that there's no way, or at least tags it in the article as evidence against a young Earth, that says that the cliffs of Dover could not have been formed by a whirlpool.
That's not. Okay, well, hang on. You won't, that's not how science works. You're not going to find You're not going to find a peer paper that said aliens didn't come down and make these things either. You don't do peer papers on what isn't the case.
You need sources.
I mean, you're talking. Look up. Go on Wikipedia. Give them.
Wikipedia is not a source. You can't use that.
But they do cite sources. They do have.
If you ask ask a geologist, ask a paleontologist, we understand how these deposits form. It would be perverse to claim that we understand how these things form, except for this one, which is a whirlpool, even though there's absolutely no evidence that it was formed by a whirlpool.
Yeah, I mean,
where's your source?
Let's just go on.
We know how these things formed, Chris. This is the funniest part. We understand the mechanism.
The source. I'm not willing to accept anything that I cannot see with my own eyes.
And Jackson could send you those sources, right? But you just threw an ad hoc out of nowhere a term like whirlpool that you got from a Kent Hovind tour guide. I have done this 8 years. I've never heard Kent Hovind tour guide be used as a citation. I am losing it. This is the greatest thing I've ever heard. What's your citation, Kent Hovind tour guide? Sorry.
Yeah, what is his citation for that? I mean, goodness gracious. Oh man, let's see. Here's the Jurassic Solnophin. Let me open this one. Okay.
Yeah, why you do that?
In the meantime, though, go ahead, Steve.
I was just say, while you're doing that, it's kind of like asking, hey, do you have a paper that says that if I throw something down to the ground, it's not going to all of a sudden fly into the sun? Well, no, because that's not how papers work, right? Papers explain gravity, right? You're not going to have a paper that is there to show these negative things because there's an infinite amount of them. You literally have an infinite amount of papers, and that's so you don't ask for that type of evidence. That's not evidence saying.
I just want one.
Okay, here you go. The regularly bedded platin calc, this is the Solnophin limestone, reaches a total thickness of up to 100 meters. They're interrupted by this formation. These are irregularly folded beds resulting from slumped soft sediment masses that collapse downslope, possibly triggered by earthquakes. The very fine-grained micritic limestone slabs of the platin calc are called flints and occur in packets of sheets with an average thickness of 0.5 to 1 centimeters, reaching a maximum thickness of 30 centimeters in the Solnophin area. The slabs frequently have some internal lamination, but will not split along this due to an absence of clay minerals. They're separated by thinner fissile shaly layers called fole, which contain 10 to 20% clay. Stacks of flints can split along bedding planes, and it is along these that the majority of fossils can be found. Both flints and fole contain the same microfossils, coccoliths, together with rare foraminifera. According to most authors, the platin calc and chromlogin were deposited in the shallow basins with an average depth of 30 to 80 meters between sponge algal mounds. In certain outcrops, the transition of Solnophin platin calc into sponge algal mound facies can be observed. Okay, I could keep going. I could read the entire article, but
I didn't hear whirlpool in there. Whirlpool was not mentioned. There wasn't anything to address that.
I know there's no. No, I agree.
Why would it mention whirlpool?
Because there's no evidence of a whirlpool. There are these.
It's not even addressed.
Why would it be?
I know.
Because it's scientifically nonsensical.
Because no one. It's like asking why is no one asking about the possibility that 9/11 was caused by aliens? Because we have no reason to ask the question.
Yeah, you have to have a reason to ask the question.
It doesn't matter. We're talking about science. It doesn't matter how small
the issue is. That's not how science works, Chris, at all.
Steve's right.
It is. You got to see it with your own eyes.
No, Chris.
It doesn't matter. I don't care.
Hang on. This is a fundamental misunderstanding Chris has had for many years, actually. Chris. For years, you've had this misunderstanding. And I know we've corrected you before how science actually works. Now, Jackson here studies science. He's in school for science. He's actually working on a bachelor's in science. The people that write these articles are scientists. Let me ask you something. Do you think that have absolutely no knowledge of science? I'm not trying to be demeaning, but do you think that you are more qualified than an actual scientist who I've had on, who you've talked to, of what constitutes science? Because no scientist agrees with you.
I agree with that. No scientist agrees with me.
No
The
scientist.
Scientific community in general reject a young Earth.
No. You misunderstand. That is true, but they also reject how you are trying to look at science. Like your understanding of science is not anywhere found in any science that I've ever looked into. No scientist I've ever talked to adheres to your version of science.
I imagine that it would be, Steve.
Then you can't say it's science. It is Christopher's version, stipulative uses of science that nobody else adheres to. You have your own uses here.
Amen.
So,
okay.
Can I tell you something? So in marine biology, well, before it was nixed thanks to the coronavirus, we were starting an experiment on this red algae called Gracilaria. The point of this experiment was to determine how anthropogenic climate change, specifically global warming, affects the growth rates of Gracilaria. Okay. What we understand based on our reading of the technical literature is that there is an effect. There are different effects on different species of Gracilaria. This appears, based on the reading, based on what other researchers have done in this field, to be the positive evidence, or there appears to be positive evidence in favor of this claim that anthropogenic climate change affects Gracilaria growth. Okay. There's no reason to invoke something like there's no reason to invoke aliens or magic whirlpools if there is positive evidence indicative of this mechanism, right? You see what I mean? We don't need to ask the question about aliens and about whirlpools if there's no evidence. If all the evidence points to this one thing, we can say maybe it's a possibility. Sure, theoretically it could be, but it's not a well-reasoned possibility. It's not a very good possibility. It seems most likely all the evidence is pointing to this one explanation, and that's what we have here.
If we could break down that article that you just read, like if we could do a whole hour on that, that would be great, because I think that there's a lot of information in there that would indicate that that layer was formed from a whirlpool.
Well, you're allowed to believe that, and in fact, I will send all of my sources to Steve because I have several.
Sure, I'll put them in the video description.
Which are all of my citations for my opening statement.
Give me the citation. Give me your link to RJ's book too, actually, and I'll throw that in there as well.
Oh yeah.
Because if Chris wants, Chris, if I don't know what you read, but RJ Downing is one of the most well cited. I mean, he's not well cited, but he has citations. He goes around and collects information and he cites them. He's probably, if anything, oversighted. But if you want to find anything, you could indexically just go look at RJ's work, and he already looked into all this stuff.
What's his name again?
Downing.
One more time. RJ Downing.
Downard.
Okay.
Yeah. Jackson works with him, and they have a book out together actually on.
We do. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
You got a book? Is it published?
It has been. Yeah.
What is it called?
The Rocks Were There.
Yeah, I'm getting that ad for sure. I'm gonna check that out.
That's what we recommend. There you go. Super chat real quick.
The royalties.
We're gonna extend this, by the way, if you guys got time. Yesterday was only an hour, but I think people want more, and you guys had that 10 minutes at the beginning, so let's talk more a little bit. But Stupid Horror Energy for us for $10. By the way, I love you, Stupid Horror Energy. She says, I love her. She says there's an entire layers of microorganisms and not much else entrapped in the chert known from the Precambrian. How is this explained by the run for the hills creationist hypothesis? So I think she's asking, in the Precambrian, how do you have these layers of microorganisms? You don't see things running from a cataclysmic fun in some kind of weird ideological sorting that the Young Earth Creationist is trying to say. So like that dinosaurs are not running for the hills and laying like eggs down in a nice little row as they run kind of thing. But how do
Yeah,
you
they're
explain
going
the
to get buried and then
microorganisms?
jumbled up. What you're going to find when you look at any fossil, if you're looking for a fossil, what you're actually looking for is a giant graveyard containing thousands of other dead organisms, and that's really ironic when
Right,
you
but
think about it.
why don't we see any higher level organisms? Like we don't see mammals in the Precambrian layer. Why is that?
Yeah, because they're not living in the crust of the earth under the sea. They're living on the land.
Neither are most of the Precambrian organisms.
Yeah, they were living on the bottom of the ocean. They weren't living in the
Yeah,
crust.
they weren't
Yeah,
living in the
that's what I'm
crop.
saying. Is you're finding microorganisms in the Precambrian because that's where they're living before they died. And then you're finding the animals on land because
No,
that's where they're
no, there's
living.
animals in the sea too. I mean, they just didn't
Yeah.
fossilize as
Um,
well. But we have animals in the Cambrian, and some would argue, I think Jackson maybe almost like a pre-animal type thing in Precambrian. Where that line where animals begin is kind of vague, but
I'm saying if you dig into the earth and you find an area or a strata, a layer of strata that you know is Precambrian, well, then you know that anything that is in that layer was living probably on the bottom of the sea. I
yeah,
mean, it's
but I
basically
don't think you're asking the
100% chance.
question.
well, look, here's
And
the
by the way, I
thing.
do think there's animals in the Precambrian. I just don't remember what they're called.
Oh yeah, there are like
Yeah,
Dickinsonia,
there you
Kimberella,
go.
these sorts.
Yeah,
But
they were considered animals.
the
Yeah,
True
the
Scott's
thing
good,
is,
man. I can't believe it.
yeah, he knows his stuff.
yeah, I'm actually writing a script about it for an upcoming video, but you don't get to know anything more about it. Haha. Well, these animals, you have to remember, we're finding these strata on land, right?
Hmm.
The oldest strata in the ocean dates to the Jurassic, except for one little piece that dates to the Carboniferous in the Mediterranean. But other than that, all the rest of the strata in the ocean, the oldest of it dates to the Jurassic, right? The very oldest. Okay. You have to wonder why. Why is that?
Hold on, guys.
Sure, no
Spit
problem.
it out. She's trying to swallow a little magnet.
Well, yeah, let's not have that. That would be bad. Let's take care of your kid.
Yeah.
That's take number one priority. I'm not having a child died on my channel.
Yeah.
If it's just Jackson or somebody, whatever. But no kid deaths.
Whoops.
Yeah. Hey, what if happened to Jackson Weed? I don't know. He went on Steve's channel and choked to death on. I don't know. I do good, Chris.
Yeah.
You sure?
Was there a question asked?
Yeah, but I
before
want to make
that?
sure. I want to make sure your kid's okay.
Oh yeah, she's fine.
All right.
I got it.
So that was also part of my question during my opening was, when we do find these animals that do live on the bottom, why do we not find them together? Why do we not find flounders with trilobites or other modern species of echinoderms and things like that living with ancient species of fish and echinoderms? Why is there this clear progression?
Well, in order to avoid kind of repeating myself and you avoiding repeating yourself, I just feel like that may be not, because I could respond and say that that's based on where they live, and then you would repeat,
It's not,
something else.
though.
I just don't know if this would go anywhere if I
I could.
answered this question.
Well, my answer originally was it's not. So it's not just because that's where they lived. We're talking about organisms that are living in the same type of environment, the benthic environment, but they're not being found together, even though they're living in like marine strata lower, or you're finding it in this lower layer, and then you go up and you find another bit of marine strata, but it's got a totally different set of organisms living in it. If the global flood is true, why the heck would that happen?
Well, the global flood, as you said, the jumbling problem, it's going to jumble it up at first. It's just going to be complete madness. But then as the flood progresses and you got the tides repeatedly going up and down, and you got the liquefaction process, like when you stand on the ocean, the shore, and then the waves go out and you feel the little particles jumping up in between your toes. That's just basically the sediment rising to the surface, and then anything heavier than those particles is coming down. And I realize that you're saying that there's evidence that this isn't necessarily the case, and I'm not saying that the flood laid down the strata and it laid down the fossils in the exact same way, in the exact same pattern all over the world. It's kind of a jumbled mess, so there's going to be some differences. They're going to find some different things in different places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a global flood didn't occur. You just may need to look at it from another
Well,
perspective. You need to
let me
find a
ask
way
you.
to explain it.
Let me ask you this, in that regards to Sarah's question, because she had a super chat. Did you ever heard of an index fossil? Does that sound familiar, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. So an index fossil is basically a fossil that gives you an indication of the strata that you're in, right? It's used as helpful to dating the type of strata that you're in. So if you're dealing with something, and I just watched a video on this the other day. It was a beautiful, not a geode, but it was a type of rock that they cut they literally hit the rock and cut it in half, and a beautiful trilobite fossil appeared. I mean, it was just right there in there. It was beautiful. Now, trilobites were, several hundreds of millions of years ago, 500 to some odd million years ago, right? So
Right.
we would expect as evolution people to 500 million years ago, there would be certain things we would not expect to see, right? We would not expect a bird fossil to be 500 million years ago, right? Just, it's not something that we would expect as we understand phylogeny and cladistics. So how come is it that it doesn't matter where you go, any kind of anywhere in the world, tribal heights were everywhere, you will never find certain fossils with other fossils. If there was a global flood, it would be almost, I would say, impossible not to have such mixing that you would have just a cornucopia of fossils. And so we would break open these hermetically sealed rocks. We would see a trilobite, and we see a canary next to it or something too, or something. But that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
It's counter to
Right.
what we would expect.
Here's the thing, Steve. I could give you my explanation for that, but you know what I'm not going to be able to do? I'm not going to give you a scientific journal that supports that idea. That's not even going to be possible for me to do. You know
Right,
why?
and I get that.
Carefully protected state religion.
Well,
I'm not allowed.
Well, if you were allowed if you had the evidence.
Yeah.
Well,
I would disagree with that.
I could tell you right now. I have a friend who just published in a journal that the Creationist magazine, the Journals of Creation, would not let him publish in. He went to an actual Christian publishing journal, right, for science, which is perfectly fine because they do science, but it's a legit journal with an impact factor. He had to publish in that. So in that particular case, it was the Young Earth Creationist who refused to publish his paper because it went against Young Earth Creationism narrative.
Yeah, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah, well, and by the way, his paper was right, and I talked about last night. Dr. Humphreys admitted that there was mistakes made. Now, he didn't fully give him credit for everything, but he did admit the math was wrong. Finally, I talked to numerous people on it, like Landon Kurt Knoll, and a whole bunch of other people. And they're like, yeah, this model does not represent this model. This math is wrong. Humphreys is incorrect. He finally did admit to this, and this was only last week or so. But this is what I'm saying. If the information is solid, and there's a reason that you have that can support your evidence, you will be published. You will be. Look, scientists like finding out things that are abnormal. They like finding discrepancies. They like going, hey, here we have this huge problem. We found, a bird with a trilobite. How do we fix this? How do we resolve this? And it may go unresolved for decades until somebody says, well, this is the explanation for it. Right?
Not if the scientific community believes that this information is completely irrelevant to humanity. They wouldn't publish it. Because they only publish material that's relevant.
Depends on how you define relevant.
Well, and because they don't believe that Young Earth has predictive power that can be useful for technology and health and stuff like that, why would they waste their time publishing something like that?
We'll see. It isn't, though, because it's wrong. But I don't know what you mean by useful, because I would look at things like, figuring out what type of strata is in this formation. Is that useful for humanity? Well, not in your day-to-day, but it tells us about natural history of the planet and helps us understand more of nature. And I would say
that's extremely valuable. Yeah.
Well, it's valuable to the people who are interested in it, but in your day-to-day, you're not going to care. Most people don't care, and so it's not just about something being useful or just about something having predictive power. Predictive power is derived from these theories, which gradually accumulate data over years, over decades. Evolutionary theory has predictive power. Creationists and intelligent designers like to claim predictive power, and then they put out a prediction, and oftentimes it's a retrodiction.
After the fact.
Yeah, like Kent Hovind had this whole debate he did years ago where he says, "I predict if creationism is true, justice should exist." You were born into a world in which justice exists, so that's not really a prediction, stuff like that. And so, if you can predict something like Darwin predicted the existence of a moth, which would have this extremely long proboscis to reach into this flower, right? And years later, it was found, right? That's a prediction, and no one knew about this moth until after or later. They did research later, and they discovered it. And so evolutionary theory has that kind of predictive power. I don't think I've never. Go ahead.
What I would say is, if we could get the scientific community to change their minds just a little bit at a time, a daily, slow, long, gradual process until they accept at least a few of the ideas of a young Earth, I would say that the Bible, that young Earth creationism, would have
But
predictive power.
why?
But first, the scientific community has to they have to accept it and they
Why?
have to
Why?
publish it.
Why
They don't
would
have
you?
to accept it,
But why
but they
would you?
would have to
Why,
publish it.
but why would you ask them to accept something that's already been disproven many times over? I mean, so that's not. Let me get on this argument to you. A flat Earth saying to you the same thing. Why does the scientific community take flat earthers seriously? Because it's already been debunked. It's already been shown to be not the case. Not only just the Earth is round, that has been demonstrated, but flat Earth to be scientifically impossible given the observations. Now, Jackson asked you about a predictive ability.
Bias. That's why.
It's not biased. There's no bias when it comes to objective facts. These are objective facts. The Earth is round. We can objectively look at it. That's an objective
when it
fact.
comes to peer,
But
when it
hang
comes
on,
to publishing something, there is bias.
Let me ask you, Chris. So I brought this to your attention last night. So we're talking about something like the Sarcopterygians. Is that even Sarcopterygians? Yeah, Sarcopterygians. That was a very extinct form of was it the lobefin fish, right? One of the members of that genus was called Tiktaalik. Now, when they looked to find Tiktaalik, right, they knew where to look for it. They said this is going to be 300 some odd million billion or 300 million years old. A billion. It's like 370 million years old, give or take. And they said, hey, what strata are we going to find this in? Where would this be, geographically speaking, in the world? And what level would we find it at? What strata would we find it at? They went to somewhere in Canada. It was off the coast of Canada. And they found it. That is a prediction based upon a model that says this is where we would find it. If the flood was true, there is no possible way beyond blind luck that they would have been able to go exactly to where they expected this animal to exist and find it. Could you do that with a Young Earth Creationist prediction and say, hey, given the flood, I want to say there's an animal like this. It has to exist somewhere in the world. Here it exists in this part of the world. We're going to go look for it and we're going to find it. And by the way, they did the same thing with Paralipithecus catalonicus, the predecessor to all members of the hominids, Hominidae, which is the great apes. So they knew where to find this in Spain, and they found it. It's about 13 million years old, right? It's a common ancestor to all the great apes.
There is an organization, a company of Young Earth Creationists. What was it, Zion Oil or something like that? Yeah, Zion Oil, who tried to use flood geology to drill for oil.
Yeah,
they've gone bankrupt.
Do you know how many dry wells they had? 4.
Yeah.
3 or 4, and their stock went down to under $1 at one time.
Yeah, they've gone.
I don't think they got bankrupt because last time I heard about Zion Oil is that they said, okay, we're not going to do the biblical model anymore. We're going to rely on actual science. But they're still. Last time I looked at their stock, it was like $1.50 or something, and they had after drilling that many dry wells,
Yeah, it's crazy.
How exactly were they going about? What is their model like to find this oil?
Prayer.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd have to read up on their how they went about it.
So Chris, can you give us an example of predictability for Young Earth Creationism that if there's a flood, how would those two things that I just talked about, right, the Tiktaalik and the Paralipithecus catalonicus, how could we have found them? And what would you predict?
The information isn't published in the scientific journals. I can give no predictive power whatsoever for Young Earth Creation.
Well, no, you should be able to. You have people like Standing for Truth will wax rhapsodic about Nathaniel Jensen and John Sanford talking about, all these predictions they've made. They haven't actually made any predictions. They kind of did the same thing that Ken Hovind did.
They had talked to us tour guide.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They kind of they took these things which we already knew to exist, and they basically said, "Hey, we predict these based on this model." Did you though? But that's not how science works. If they had these and they could try to publish them, theoretically, if they took the core of what they were trying to argue, if they just said, okay, we're not going to mention creationism, we're not going to mention the Bible, any of that, we're just going to take the core, whatever mathematical prediction or whatever genetic, biogeographic, fossil, whatever, and said, okay, we expect to find this here based on this, and they stripped it of all reference to like creationism, and they found it. If they found it, theoretically, they could get published in a journal because other researchers would have to look at that and go, wow, they made a prediction based on this series of data, and they found this.
Based on baronomology, I would love that. If they did that with baronomology, wouldn't that be great?
Absolutely. Yeah, I posted a challenge. I actually posted 2 challenges on my channel now. One of the first one was the baronomology challenge, where I challenge it's like R&R's phylogeny challenge. It's demonstrate that organisms are in discrete categories. There's none. All right, all organisms are related.
Well, Tony Reed is going to have to forgive me. I told him I wouldn't bring this to. He just briefly mentioned the fact that last night when I talked to him, he said that we should leave the science to you guys, to the people who actually are in the fields, and I would 100% agree with that. I mean, if you're going to try to look for oil, or you're going to try to find an improvement for technology or medicine, you're going to need to leave that to the professionals, regardless of what they believe, that the earth is young or it's old. I would say that on a general basis, these people know what they're doing. I don't agree that they know what they're doing in some other areas. I would highly disagree that they are very smart in most areas, but there's some exceptions there.
I don't.
But I'm going to leave the science to the professionals. I totally agree. There's nothing that needs to change. We don't need to use the Young Earth model to try to better improve the world.
You agree it wouldn't work,
the Young
right?
Earth model to edify the Bible.
Okay,
That's
but
why
all right, so you do agree then? It seems like the Young Earth model is not going to help us understand geology, not going to help us understand biology. It's not going to help us drill into for natural gas or any kind of oil or coal. It's not going to help us determine anything because it has no predictive ability. You accept that fact?
Yes.
Okay, that's a start. That's good.
Okay.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to point out because it is kind of
Do we
getting
still
too
want to
late.
do Q&A also?
Yeah, we'll get to Q&A if you want to do that. I'd love that. So let me just throw this out there before we get to your Q&A, because this is some of the stuff that Christopher had talked about last night, and he mentioned it today, which shows that Chris, you don't take a lot of them on board, because I discussed polonium halos with you last night, and I did explain to you why polonium halos are not indicative of a young Earth. These are not in situ. These are holes that have been produced several centimeters away from the parent isotope because of radon-222 is fused through the rocks and through rainwater. And also you had mentioned about C14 and diamonds. The rate study, actually, if you actually go look at the rate study, which was by Humphreys, he was integral on that. The diamonds they used were alluvial type diamonds, and there was 2 problems with some of the sourcing that they had. One, they recognized that after the fact that the testing facility that they did not test it correctly as far as not cleaning out their contamination. And so what happened was, anytime you use a destructive test in something that tests for carbon 14, it's forever going to have contamination in it, right? And you have to adjust for this. The rates things they're not the most honest of people. They didn't use the adjusted calculations, or they didn't adjust the place that tested it didn't adjust for it. And so that was a big factor in that. And also you might be interested to know, and you, by all means, if you can find a counter to this, go ahead. But the only times they found radioactivity in what's called alluvial diamonds is diamonds that come from deep mines that also have been found with uranium and thorium.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is going to actually decay into nitrogen and then C14, which these are not called intrinsic things. These are called exogenic or external types of carbon. So just because,
very well known.
Yeah, they're very well known. Just because you find diamonds and stuff that have radioactivity in C14 that should have already decayed, you have to look at where that came from. Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic, right? And this exogenic carbon is well established to be just that. No scientist in the world doesn't get that except for Ken Hovind and Young Earth Creationists, who have been putting that little chestnut out there for decades, and no scientist will ever take that seriously because they understand the topic.
They're not going to take it seriously, and that's for that same reason. They're not going to publish anything in their journals that
Is wrong. Normally wrong.
Well, look.
they're not going to publish anything in the journals that is going to address that issue specifically and
Well,
try
look.
to find evidence that the C14 was uncontaminated.
Oh no, there's papers on it. Their scientists have written
Show
on
me
it.
a scientific journal that addresses this carbon-14 in dinosaurs, coal beds, and
Lots of things.
diamonds,
I
and
actually
I
did
will
it.
give you $10. That's
I
all I got. I mean, I got to give you something. I have to have an offer.
No,
So
well, just admitting wrongness would be far more valuable to me than $10.
Yeah.
But
well, I won't
I
admit it unless you can give me a source.
well, I
Well-
actually did a whole video where I talked about well, for one thing you have to realize is none of the calculations that they run on the carbon actually date to either 10,000, 6,000, or 4,000. None of them.
None of them.
They all date to the upper range of carbon
Tens of
dating.
thousands of years.
Yeah, which is what we would expect if they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, they were all in the high range of tens of thousands of years. So James has asked a question. That's a good question. How and it's to both of you. How do you fact check your sources?
Science Daily, Live Science, Science Magazine,
Live Science is
New
not the,
Scientist,
those are
which
not,
is
those are not good sources, dude. I'll tell you right now. They're not.
those
Nature
are,
Journal,
Nature, sure.
Britannica.
But Live
what was
Science,
the next one?
Botanica, you mean?
What about Science Daily, Science Direct, New Scientist?
Well, Science Direct is just a source for where articles are published. It's like academia.
Well, I could use some help on this, and if you can give me like a list of the most prestigious journals that there is available, I would like that list.
Nature, PNAS, and Science are the top 3 in the United States. You can also look up on Google Scholar. If you like look up journals and things, they'll tell you their impact score and all that kind of stuff. And so you can see, who's publishing, how much the work is cited, that sort of stuff. You can do that for individual research results. So,
and let me ask, why would a paper matter if there are papers out there that say this? Like, you agree right now, every paper out there will not support a Young Earth Creationist, right? I mean, that's a given. So what good is really having a paper that, like, for example, I know there's wildly changing topics, but it's not in a way. Dr. Tompkins, he argued on Answers in Genesis against the human chromosome fusion site, right? He literally has said that there's an active transcript on the canonical read on the human chromosome 2 for the pan troglodyte 12 and 13, and it's called the DDX11L2 gene, which does exist. He says an active read. All the research shows there's no active read there.
bullcrap.
It's 3.9 RPKM, and that's in the testes. It's below anything you would find even background level. So there's not a canonical read to be had. Now, this is well known now. He can't get anything published on any peer-reviewed journal because the facts do not fit his narrative, what he's telling people, saying, oh, there's there's active gene there. No scientist that I've talked to agreed with him, not one, right?
It's an alternative transcript.
Yeah, there's an alternative transcript, and there's the canonical. There's 2 transcripts. He's saying that the alternative is read by the canonical. The canonical, it has some read to it, but it's very, very, very low.
It's like almost indistinguishable from random noises.
Right. So it's spurious, reads. But my point to Christopher is, if there's not a paper out there debunking Tompkins, you know why? Because Tompkins' work hasn't even got to the level of being taken seriously enough to have a scientist write a paper in a journal about it.
Well,
because
Chris,
the evidence doesn't support his thing.
Well, Chris, I have to ask, what do you think about papers that are paradigm shifters? Is someone with a new idea coming to the table and turning the mind, or attempting to turn the minds, at least, of the people entrenched in one view? What you are aware these happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the evolution of the theory of evolution, you had Darwinism first, which was natural selection and phyletic gradualism. Then you had neo-Darwinism, those plus Mendelian inheritance. And then you had, towards the modern synthesis, and you had more mechanisms like you have horizontal gene transfer, and you have neutral evolution and evo-devo. And now we're in like
epigenetics.
People say, Yeah, some people say we're in the extended evolutionary synthesis now.
Third wave evolution. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah, the point is, people keep adding to the theory. They keep changing the paradigm, and these people aren't just hand waved because they're not part of the mainstream. Their ideas are critically evaluated, and they're taken seriously. The creationists were taken seriously at one point. William Paley was taken seriously by research by naturalists at one point. But the arguments that he used for intelligent design are not anymore, because we have natural selection. We have all these other mechanisms which generate the biodiversity that we have today. Okay, it's paradigm shifts happen. It's not like there's just a conspiracy of people rejecting all ideas a priori. They exist. These ideas exist, and they come in and they change minds, or they don't, and they get discarded. Do you understand that though, right?
Yeah, Gentry and his work with the halos he published in actual scientific journals,
Yeah.
but that took him an incredible amount of work, and he was not able to put in the journals and his articles anything to do with Young Earth Creationism, or they wouldn't have published it.
Right.
And that is
Yeah, he
because
would've
they
got
are
the job
biased.
And did I not explain to
That's
you
my
that
point.
Robert Gentry admitted that the mechanism by which these polonium halos would come about, in his view, were called singularities, which were one-off miracles. These were one-time miracles that God did. Do you want scientific journals to publish a conclusion of God did it? That's not science, man. Even you have to appreciate that. That's what Gentry said.
I would publish in a journal Walt Brown's view of those halos, not Gentry's view.
I'm not familiar with Walt Brown's view of the halos, just on his hydroplate theory, but it doesn't matter what his view is. We've already have an explanation for the halos. We know how they formed.
Well, then why would they publish anything that I would throw at them if you already know?
Well, unless you could find evidence to the contrary, but you have to be the one to establish the evidence. Okay, like for example, Jackson mentioned paradigm shifts. Let me give you two examples of paradigm shift, if I can remember correctly. There was like Barbara McClintock, all right? She came up with transposable elements, right? These jumping genes. Yeah. This was not taken very seriously way back when. She didn't win. She won a Nobel Prize, but it wasn't until the early '80s for it. But she had to fight for that, right? Because it was something like, people are like, what the hell is this? This transposable element that you can have that can go from, one bacteria to another and just change the entire genome? No, it does. How does this work? And the other thing was with endosymbiosis theory, right? Lynn Margulis, right? Lynn Margulis had a fight tooth and nail against the establishment until the late 60s. And even probably even later, I don't think it was even taken on board until even later than that. And it took a lot of work in the 80s, actually, I think, to get really established that this was not just how mitochondrial things in your system came about, but there's a lot of endosymbiosis all across the genome. Not the genome, the biodome. And so this theory that somehow you had this internal symbiotic relationship, this was a paradigm shift, dude, because how you now in your cell, you have a separate organism. In every cell, a mitochondrial DNA is completely different from your DNA. It was an organism that lived in that cell for a while, and that became obviously the mitochondrial that produces ATP synthase. But we would never become so multicellular and so huge as animals if we didn't have that huge boost in ATP synthase, right? But we knew that we had to have it somewhere. We couldn't explain it at one time. They said, hey, how the hell did we get so much ATP, right? And they found the mitochondrial DNA. They said, well, how do these things come about? These are completely different DNA.
Right. The original thinking was that there was a gradual evolution from a prokaryote, and slowly it sort of sectioned off an area to produce ATP, and then
specialized some organelle or something like that.
And there was some argument over this group of protists, which they called archezoa, which are now in separate little groups. But this was kind of the idea. But Lynn Margulis came along and completely flipped everything by proposing, hey, this was a bacterium, and the eukaryote was originally an archaean, and these two entered the symbiotic relationship, and as Steve mentioned, we now know of lots more. There's this thing called the rotoplex hypothesis, where there are multiple endosymbiotic within endosymbiotic events going on among protists because they just keep swallowing each other and using each other for different functions.
How cool is that? Now, see, Young Earth Creationism would never given us any of that. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't predict anything, and all the evidence just seems to go against it. So it is kind of getting kind of late. So kind of wrap up your discussion, and we'll take some questions. Well, you want to take the questions first? It's up to you guys.
Sure, we can take questions.
All right. So let me. All right. Well, we've got the live chat. I've been looking. If you got some questions for these two gentlemen, please let me know now. I'm going to be doing these things a little bit differently, I think, going forward. I do want to get back into more of a roundtable discussion, but I'm going to be having usually somebody come along like Christopher and Jackson, and I'm also going to be having other people kind of join rather than be kind of a one-to-one discussion like James has a Moderated Debate. Again, not knocking that style. It's just not the direction I want to go.
Sure.
But I think the roundtable discussions, we'll get we even have experts come in, right? I had Dr. Jas Rasmussen on the other day. I've been talking to a lot of people that are willing to come on and just talk about various subjects. So I was saving a lot for the non sequitur show, but because of the CV19 and all that, I'm going to start bringing him onto this channel. Like I had to bring in Josh Rasmussen, even though I was going to wait to bring him on the non sequitur. So. All right, so what do we got for questions here? Yeah, kind of like Rayleigh says, kind of like Arthur's card. Yeah, I wanted to have like a round table, like a legit round table, and have people sitting around it having these types of discussions. I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, definitely.
let's see what kind of questions we got for you. Stupid Horror Energy asked for $5. Do you think there are more leaps in evolution, such as endosymbiosis?
Do I think there are leaps in evolution? Well, yeah. I mean, there are lots of horizontal gene transfer events among prokaryotes. So much so to the point that you have to kind of wonder, what is a species? Well, I mean, they were already kind of wondering that because
there's 6 different things or something to define a species.
Exactly. Yeah. The question is like, there was a paper by Woese, I think it was by Doolittle. It's titled "Uprooting the Tree of Life," in which he talks about this archaean, which has all this cellular machinery for bacteria, but it has an archaean-specific protein. So it's classed as an archaean, even though it has all these parts of bacteria. So there's stuff like that, which is occurring mostly among protists and prokaryotes. But once you get up into like plants or fungi or animals, it kind of levels off.
What do you think,
See,
Chris?
this is what I mean by leave the science to you guys, because there's no way that I could have even answered that question, especially not with that level of eloquency.
Well, Chris, do you recognize that, to answer Sarah's question, he mentioned Evo-Devo, right? Evolutionary development. And there's also, people throw this term out there, epigenetics, but I've yet to find a Young Earth Creationist that really knows about it.
Standing for truth, we'll talk about.
Like I said.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with epigenetics is that they didn't expect, right, there to have the ability to have a passed on through the germline something that could affect the offspring that isn't encoded into the nucleotide sequence itself, right? So the epigenetic features like the methylation of the DNA, where you have a methyl group attached to it, they didn't realize it could be transferred on. Now, does it go away after a while? Yes. This is I would consider this more of a Neo-Lamarckian type system, but it was unexpected, right? It was very unexpected. It's something new and novel. And by the way, that's not the only thing in epigenetics. You get into methylation, acylation,
you have
histone modification.
Right, the suppression of one of your X chromosomes if you're a female, all that stuff.
Now, do you think 100 years ago they would have had any idea of some of this stuff? Of course not. These are things that are known over a period of time because the models that we have work. And if the models didn't work, then any models that kind of come from them, like epigenetics, could even happen if we didn't understand how proteins folded or worked or wrap around a histine, or how methylation occurs. If we didn't understand chemistry, right, or what a methyl group was, we wouldn't know any of this stuff of how to predict certain things, right? And this is why they say like pregnant women shouldn't eat certain foods that has a high ability to cause methylation because it can be passed down to the fetus. So these are fascinating things. It doesn't mean the models are wrong. It just means that we've learned things from it. But these are paradigm shifts in some ways. And I think Evo-Devo and I think things like epigenetics are
And
incorporated
neutral
now.
evolution.
Neutral evolution, yeah. I mean, like Christopher, the natural selection only works upon positive or negative traits. In other words,
Right.
a trait has to be non-neutral to the environment for selective pressures to act upon it. Genetic drift can act upon any of them, like neutral mutations and stuff like that, because it's stochastic, it's random. But we're learning there is neutral mutations are a whole new field.
It's even more prolific. Yeah, neutral evolution.
Neutral evolution, yeah.
That was kind of the one thing. That was kind of the one thing. One of the few things that was like researchers went, "Holy crap! This is occurring at a far larger, far higher rate than natural selection is." You think natural selection is occurring at every hour. Well, neutral evolution's that on steroids.
Yeah.
It's doing way more stuff than natural selection.
Yeah, I remember like years ago, people were so weirded out when they heard about what was called what is it called when I forgot what it is. What's it called when a animal can actually change phenoplasticity? That's what it is. I had to think about it. Phenotypic plasticity. Amazing thing, right? That if something can actually change on the fly, it's kind of a phenotype. But we understand these things now, that they're not magic. They're not something that we would predict in any Young Earth Creationist model. But we know using actual science, as you said, Chris, and using old Earth models, this stuff works. So your argument, it seems to be, in a nutshell, that even though all the evidence points to an all old Earth, I think you do recognize that somewhere deep down, that you just want a young Earth to be true because you think the young Earth proves a deity.
I would say that, the old Earth models are working, and we need to continue to use them, even if the scientific community accepts a young Earth and it can be proven that the Earth is young. We need to continue to use a naturalistic perspective in order to understand nature. That has to be the rule, and it has to remain that way.
Okay, that generates within me
Cringe factor?
a lot of questions. A lot. Because at this point, I'm kind of wondering if you believe that all along, what was really the point of the debate? I mean,
the point of the debate is to show that the fossils were not formed by long, gradual processes over millions of years. They were formed in a catastrophic flood in the days of Noah around 4,400 years ago.
Okay, but as you just said, if the researchers can use the old Earth model and it works, and as we established earlier, can make predictions, Occam's razor cuts off Young Earth Creationism.
No, it can make predictions and it's useful, but it doesn't necessarily indicate a accurate age.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make, or it makes predictions, but those predictions are not fulfilled. Things like we should expect evidence of archetypes in the fossil record, which was the start of the Barrowmans, which spread out, and there shouldn't be evidence of universal common ancestry either in the fossils or in genetics or morphology.
There would be evidence of common ancestry, because the smallest microorganisms that are the simplest, you would expect to find them at the very bottom, even in a global flood model.
Well, no, I'm not even referring to microbes. Just take vertebrates. Just take vertebrates alone. You have genetic, morphological, developmental, and fossil data, which is all pointing to the exact same conclusion that they're all related, whether we're looking at a human or or a mannequin or a frog or a perch. These are all related to each other. We can know this through a whole bunch of different methods, right? We have the morphological data. They're all sharing certain features, right? They all have a backbone. They have a post-anal tail at some point in their development, pharyngeal slits, all that jazz. There's no reason for this to be true if they don't share a common ancestor. There's no reason for them to have the same developmental plan. And as Steve mentioned earlier, why would we have Tiktaalik? Why the heck would that exist if they were created separately? And all that sort of stuff. It doesn't make any sense under a young Earth or a Barrowman model or
right.
A flood model.
These are just hypothetical models that the Young Earth Creationists do ad hoc. I mean, I told Christopher the other night, and I did mess up a little bit. And that was my fault. Sorry. I've been a little scatterbrained lately, and there's been a lot of things going on. So it was my fault. I didn't explain it correctly. I will take the heat. But I was trying to explain to Christopher about accelerated decay when they're trying to say, well, how do we incorporate millions of years of radiological decay in only 7,000 years? Well, Humphreys came up with accelerated decay. But the accelerated decay presents the heat problem because then you have to dissipate all those heat, and you can't do that. It's the amount of energy is going to be so vast it's going to liquefy the crust of the Earth. So when I asked Humphreys, how do you resolve the heat problem, which is a well-known problem in Young Creationism? They even have it on their page. This is unknown and unresolved in Young Creationism. When I asked him, how do you resolve this? He basically said, because it could be no other way. It has to be because God said that the Earth is young. The Earth is young. All science has to point to that. If anything doesn't, it's wrong. And it's like, well, then you're basically just making stuff up ad hocly to try to say this must be the case. And that's not what science is. Yeah, that's my own thing. Ad hocly.
I love the new note.
I'm allowed to twist things.
Novo Latin.
De novo Latin, yeah.
De novo Latin.
Yeah. De novo Latin. That's not what it means either. But yeah, it's I think that these scientists, Chris, they're not scientists. Come on, and you have to admit that no scientist in the world that can say, "Hey, I will discount anything that disagrees with my worldview and my theological positions, even if it's objectively the case."
These guys are completely wasting their time. These Institute of Creation and these other guys that are having these giant industries that have all these scientists together, they need to be a part of the actual scientific community or they're doing no good, in my perspective. They need to open up a church and then they need to go to the actual laboratories to do the science.
They have the rates. Well, here's the thing: the Rates Project tried to do real science, but they failed. And they had to change some of the maths to make it work out right. I'm sorry, but
they did. They weren't working with the right people.
Well, they're working with people that they're basically paid to lie for these organizations, right? I mean, because these Young Earth Creationists. Well, I do believe a lot of them actually believe their own rhetoric. Yeah. I think that they have compartmentalized to the point there's just so much tension in their mind because when they do their thesis, they use older models, right? I mean, you recognize that fact. Yeah. So, anyways, we are going to wrap it up. I appreciate you two coming in and talking about this. We're going to, like I said, we'll do more about this. Jackson, I'll have you come on, and you know what? I do want Standing for Truth to join, but I want it to be in a roundtable format that I have the ability to moderate, because I think, and this is no disrespect to you guys at all. I do watch you, and I do watch RJ. I think you guys do a wonderful, everything you guys do, but I don't like not SJ. I don't like Standing for Truth getting away with Gish Galloping and Benefit Free getting away with Gish Galloping. Lord. I don't like them having the ability to run the topic, and they need to get on one topic and just run with that. And anytime they go and have any divergence from it, you slap them back down and you get your ass back on the exact topic because when Christopher,
like what Aaron Ra and Ken Hovind did.
Exactly. And look who moderated that.
Oh, I wonder who that was.
Yeah. See, Christopher, when you came on, the first thing you did, you spent 10 minutes putting out like 20 different things, all of which have already been discussed.
It all related to the fossil record. It did.
But here's the thing. Do you think it's honest, and I'm intellectually honest, this is a virtue, to throw out 10 claims that each one could take several hours to even touch on, and then say, here's all my evidence, here you go, Jackson, pick one and run with it. And then what happens is people say, well, look, he didn't address none of any other stuff. That's not how you run it. That's not how you actually do a successful debate. You only debate the topic and give evidence for what you're actually debating for. You don't bring in all the other extraneous stuff that you can take several hours to even suss through, because I don't think that's fair to your opponent. That's called gish galloping.
Yeah, we could do this debate for 2 hours just on one little area. That's what science. That's what's so amazing about science. You could study one little thing for hours and hours.
Oh, so I don't disagree with that.
It's challenging to do a debate and try to get everything covered that you can. It's a real challenge, and maybe I failed. I'm sorry if I did some gish galloping, but
Maki said,
you're fine.
Maki said Zion's Oil and Gas closed at 18 cents per share today.
Ray Rod says, Steve, do Jackson and RJ versus Raw, Matt, and SFT. Oh my God.
No, I thought about that. Look at Raw Matt's Matt's debating tonight, actually, epigenetics.
Well, oh Christ.
Yeah.
But one thing first, Rob Matt's going to get featured in my next video. I never talk about him because he's Raw Matt.
Oh, Raw Matt is
Standing for Truth Party. I never talk about him or Standing for Truth in my videos because I frankly don't ever watch anything.
I've read Rob Matt was the one that wrote that I hate to say book. with the Standing for Truth, right? The one that I have, the one that's all green. Yeah, that's Rob Matt that did. Oh my God, that had more errors per paragraph than anything I've ever read in my entire freaking life. It was one error compounded by another, compounded by another. They legit got nothing right. In fact,
no, I remember.
So how about we do this?
Or Aaron read. Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember Aaron read a section of it saying that all beneficial mutations were caused by epigenetics, and I thought, how did anyone even utter that sentence in the first place?
Yeah, somebody points out, like, floating hails are not really fossils, right? They could call them geological fossils, but they're not. They're not like biological fossils.
But regardless, Raw Matt will be appearing in my next video unwillingly, as he pulled some very silly. He pulled a big silly.
All right. Well, how about we do this? I don't have a connection to Raw Matt, really. He knows who I am, obviously. Standing for Truth, obviously, does too. I will arrange something with Standing for Truth, Raw Matt, Jackson, and RJ. Christopher, you can probably join us too, but I'll actually bring in somebody with some credentials as well. A fair discussion, but it'll be under the guise that Standing for Truth and Raw Matt are not going to be able to get away with making assertions without backing them up with some credible evidence of some sort and some understanding of the topic. Because that's when I watch them, I'm like, holy crap, they're just throwing stuff out there. I mean, like Nephilim Free. When you told me earlier today, and then we're gonna wrap it up, Nephilim Free didn't know what a carbohydrate was. And by the way, if you would have told me anybody else, I would have said you must be mistaken. But here's a guy, right, that I have a video on, Nephilim Free, who many times over, wasn't just a Freudian slip, many times over, he actually was arguing that DNA was comprised of amino acids and not nucleotides.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and when I tried to correct him multiple times, he just was like shouting me down, call me an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, Neff, proteins are comprised of amino acids. Do you want it? We can spend a couple hours going over protein structures if you want. It's fascinating. But DNA does not have amino acids. It has nucleotides. He couldn't get this. So,
oh my God. It's the 6 or so like bottom feeders, like them, Neff, Ronnie, a couple others, G-Man. It's the group.
I don't think even Ronnie's that bad though. The depths that I've seen from reading Standing for Truth, man, and listening to Neffy, there's just, they don't know any of the subjects at all, like zero.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So anyways.
All right, we'll wrap it up, guys. What do you guys leave us with? Christopher, go first. Give it, 1 minute. Say what you want to say. Jackson, then you, and then I got to announce something, and we'll be good to go.
If I could just close with a couple of Bible verses, man, that'd be great.
You get
if
two.
I could get
two Bible
2
verses.
Minutes. Two. All right, 2 Bible verses. Thank you so much.
Yeah, under a minute. Go.
Romans 9:31 through 32. Israel, who sought to follow after the law of righteousness, hath not obtained unto righteousness. Wherefore? Because they sought it not of faith, but as it were by the works of the law. Romans 10:3. They, being ignorant of God's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. So it's my recommendation to anybody who is viewing this to be saved by the Lord Jesus Christ through his works and not by your own merits, because if you try to do that, you will wake up in hell. So do the opposite, accept the Lord Jesus, receive his grace, and be welcomed into paradise after you leave this earth. Thank you so much.
All right. Jackson, you hellbound heathen, you.
Well, I wake up there every day, but regardless, I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Jackson Wheat. If anybody wants to check me out, RJ Downard also has a channel. Check him out. It's his name. We have a book now. The Rocks Were There. You can buy it on Amazon. Go check that out. Of course, Steve, I'll shoot you my resources.
Yeah, please. I'll put those in the video description. Yes.
And that's
all right. Well, I'll leave you with 2 quick things. Real quick. One, there is a motion on my legal case. Go check it out. I have a new affidavit supplemental affidavit. That something gives you guys to read about the court case, because I know it's been heck with the stupid CV-19 and the court cases just getting backed up. But we are a high priority. They are well aware of what's going on with some of the antics that Kyle's been doing. We have notified the judge, and the clerk is very sympathetic. He has put our case to the next spot, so hopefully it'll get all resolved. And he told us to put a supplemental affidavit in today, And so we did. So go check that out. Also, Red's Rhetoric has a video on right now. Go check it out. I just put it in the live chat. He decided to do a video on vaping Vader. It is good, very good. I've already watched it. It has my seal of approval on it. I didn't find anything in that was not correct, and that's what I was looking for. So everything in there, I doubly vouch. I was during that time where this happened to Reds. I know about the situations he's talking about, and I am extremely, extremely confident that everything he has in there is 100% correct, as I remember it, and as additionally as other people remember it. So go check out my boy's Red's video, and I'll leave you with a Bible. I'll leave you with a Bible verse too. Ready? John 11:35. Jesus wept when he thought about young Earth creationism. Good night.
Night. Jackson, let's do this again.